Welcome to the second video of 0.2, adding and subtracting fractions. First video we talked about how to find common denominators and we worked through several examples. Now we're going to do examples about how we can apply that by adding and subtracting fractions. So our first example here is we're adding 2/5 and 1/5. So whenever you're adding fractions, the first thing you need to know is whether or not they have a common denominator. In this case, as we look at our denominators, 5 and 5, they're the exact same denominator. That means we have a common denominator. And so we can just leave it there. If they have a common denominator, the way you add is you add the numerators, the top. You do nothing, the common denominator just comes on over. So notice the 5, it comes on over, and I did 2 plus 1. So do not add the bottoms, only add the tops. If you add 2 plus 1, that's going to give you 3. So this is 3/5. And if you think about that, if you have 2/5 of a, let's say a pie, and you add another fifth of it, well then obviously you have 3/5. Just if that's how many parts you'd have. So if there's 5 total parts and you had 2 and then you had 1, you'd have 3 of the 5 parts, or 3/5. So if you have a common denominator, that's what you need. The denominator gets to come over for free. You do not add the denominators. Do not add them. Just add the numerators. Same thing with subtracting. All right, so let's do this example. I have 2/3 and 1/4. Well, my denominators, 3 and 4, are not the same. So the first thing I need is a lowest common denominator. I want you to pause the video and I want you to find the lowest common denominator for 2/3 and 1/4. Go ahead. Okay, hopefully you went through the process, you could have factored them and so forth. In this particular case, 3 and 4 have nothing in common, so the common denominator is 3 times 4, or 12. So 12 is my common denominator. Well, the way I use this is I start with my fraction, and then I'm going to just focus on each one. So let's start with 2/3. The only way I can change 2/3 is to multiply it by something. So I'm going to multiply it, but the only thing I can multiply by and not change the value is 1. So I need to multiply by a fraction that is the same in the numerator and the denominator. So 3 times what is going to give you 12? Well, 3 times 4. So if I multiply this by 4 over 4, it's going to keep this thing balanced. Same thing with my second fraction, 1/4. 4 times what is going to give me 12? 3. So I multiply by 3 over 3. Now we go back to how we did multiplication. So pause the video and multiply this fraction and this fraction. Don't add anything. Just multiply these fractions, the first two, and then the second two. Go ahead. Well, if you did that multiplication, and don't simplify, just multiply straight across, 2 times 4 is 8. 3 times 4 is 12. Same thing, 1 times 3 is 3. 4 times 3 is 12. Now I have the same denominators. It's exactly what we want. Again, do not reduce. As soon as we have same denominators, we can rewrite this as adding the tops, 8 plus 3, which is 11, and then the denominator just gets to come along. Once we get here, we can ask, can I simplify? In this case, you cannot, so we're done. All right, so let's move on to the next example. I have 1/2 minus 1/6. So again, 2 and 6 are not the same denominator, so I need to find my lowest common denominator. Go ahead and pause the video and find the lowest common denominator. Okay, so if you went through the process, you would have found that it's 2 times 3, since 6 is equal to 2 times 3. So 6 is the common denominator, the least common denominator. So now, again, we go back to our fractions, and we say 1/2. So what do I have to multiply 2 by to make it equal 6? 3, and I need the same thing on the top and the bottom, minus 1/6. Now, the reason I don't have to change this is because, well, it's already there at my least common denominator. If I do my multiplication, I have 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Now I have the same denominator. It doesn't matter subtraction. Subtraction is the same thing as addition in terms of how we handle it. So I have the same denominator, 6, and then I just subtract them instead of adding them. So 3 minus 1 is 2, so that gives me 2, 6. But notice I can simplify it. I can reduce it. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to reduce 2, 6. Okay, if you go through that process, you should have gotten, it's 2 over 2 times 3. That's where we factored them. We cancel the 2's, and you end up with 1/3. Okay, we've now done several examples. I want you to try this one. So go ahead and add these two fractions, 8/9 and 5/6. You're going to have to find a common denominator, lowest common denominator. Go ahead and do that and add those together. Okay, hopefully you worked all the way through this. Lowest common denominator, well, they both have a 3 in them, and the 6 also has a 2, and the 9 has another 3. So this equals 6, and these two equal 9. If you multiply all those together, you get 18. So my lowest common denominator is 18, so I take 9, I say 9 times what is going to give me 18? Well, it's 9 times 2, so I multiply that by 2 over 2. 6 times what is 18? 3, so multiply by 3 over 3. At any point in time, if you made a mistake, I want you to pause the video, correct it, finish working it, and then come back. Now, if you do this multiplication, you should get 16/18 plus 15/18. Again, we add straight across the top, and we would get 31 over 18. So the denominator stays the same, which we could reduce, or not necessarily reduce, but we could change it to a mixed number of 1 and 13/18. And remember, which form depends on what it's asking. So I just went ahead and put it in that form for you. Okay, so let's try this one now. I want you to pause the video and I want you to subtract 4/9 minus 1/9. Go ahead. All right, if you did that, 4/9 minus 1/9 is, well, 3/9. The nice part is they already have the same denominator. We don't have to change anything. 4 minus 1 is 3. But I can reduce that by breaking the denominator, canceling a 3, and I get 1/3. So remember, if they have the same, we just add or subtract the tops and just keep the bottom gets to come along. So do not subtract the bottoms. It'll cause a lot of problems for you. All right, now this one, I want you to add 7/15 and 3/10. So again, I want you to find the lowest common denominator, change the fractions, and then combine everything. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. So first off, we need a common denominator. They both have a 5 in them, but the 15 has an extra 3 and the 10 has a 2. So it turns out the lowest common denominator is 30. And you can stop and think about that. 15 times 2 is 30 and 10 times 3 is 30, so that works for both of them. When it comes to adding them, we got to modify. So 7/15, we can multiply by something. And I just said 15 times 2 is 30, so I multiply this by 2 over 2. And 3/10 is 3 over 3. So if I multiply those, you should end up with 14/30 plus 9/30. Add them together. 14 plus 9 is 23/30. You can check, but there is no way to reduce that because 23 is a prime number, so can't factor it. Okay, now let's try subtracting these two. So I got 11/18 minus 3/10. Go ahead and find the lowest common denominator, modify the fractions, subtract them, and you may have to simplify it then. Go ahead. Okay, the lowest common denominator for these two is 2 times 3 times 3 times 9, or 90. And the way I got that is 2 times 3 times 3. This is 18. 2 times 5 is 10. So that's the 10, that's the 18. That's where it comes from. So you can actually find the numbers that multiply together to give me each of the numbers. So with 90, I can say, okay, 18 times what is going to give me 90? It's 5. It's 5 over 5. 10 times what is going to give me 18? Well, that would be 9. Sorry, 10 times what is going to give me 90? It's 9. You do the multiplication, I get 55 minus 27. All that over 90. If you do the subtraction, I should get 20 over 90. Now, here's a good clue. These are both even numbers. Anytime you have even numbers, it's a good clue that you can reduce or simplify your fraction. So if you got to this point in time and you didn't simplify it, pause the video and finish doing that. Otherwise, you can just check at this point in time. 28 we can break up as 2 times 2 times 7, and 90 is 2 times 3 times 3 times 5 because we already have factors up here. They both have a 2, those cancel out. I'm left with 14 on the top and 45 on the bottom. Okay, so what about this one? How do I add mixed numbers? Well, there's lots of ways you can do it. You read in the book and it'll tell you different ways. My recommendation is, first and foremost, I would take each of the mixed numbers and I would turn it into an improper fraction. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to turn 4 and 2/15 into an improper fraction. Go ahead. Well, as a reminder, we take the first number in front, 4, multiply that by 15, that'll give me 60, plus the top number 2, gives me 62/15. 7/2. How would you write 7/2 as an improper fraction? Well, it will turn out to be 15/2. So my original fractions now that I'm going to be dealing with are 15 and 62/15 and 15/2. So my denominators are 2 and 15. What's my lowest common denominator then? Go ahead and pause the video and find it. Okay, now if you found that, you would have had 15 times 2 is 30. That's your lowest common denominator. So now I want to take my new fractions and I want to modify them to have 30 as a denominator. Go ahead and go through this process of how we've changed each of these to have that denominator. So the denominator is 30. Go ahead and pause the video and add those fractions together. Okay. You should have taken the first fraction, 62/15. We'd have to multiply that by 2 over 2. And 15/2, we multiply that by 15 over 15. So 2 times 62 is 124. 15 times 15 is 225. Remember, if they have the same bottom, we just add the tops. If you add those together, you get 349/30, which, by the way, is this as a mixed number. And again, what form it is will be given to you in instructions. A good rule of thumb, just in general, in my experience of using all the different levels of mathematics, if your original problem is in mixed numbers, you're going to probably want mixed numbers. If your original problem is improper fractions, you're probably going to want improper fractions. Just kind of how we usually deal with things. We like things of similar kind. All right, so now I want you to take this example and I want you to do subtraction, but the same exact idea. Take each of these, turn them into an improper fraction, then use the whole process of adding and subtracting fractions. Go ahead, pause the video and do that. So an improper fraction, 4/2 is going to turn into 9/2. It's an improper fraction. And 2 2/3 turns into 8/3. So my least common denominator is 2 times 3 or 6. So now my fractions are 9/2. You got to keep the order still because subtraction is really important. Minus 8/3. Well, 9 times 2 over 2 is going to give me 3 over 3. Sorry, 9 over 2 times 3 over 3. And then we have 8/3, and I multiply that by 2 over 2. So I end up with 27/6 minus 16/6. If we subtract the numerators, it leaves us with 11/6 or 1 5/6. So it's these subtle little things that kind of help us see how all this comes together, and we can really add and subtract fractions efficiently. Please let your instructor know if you have any questions. And the big thing is just practice this. You need to get really comfortable finding those lowest common denominators and changing fractions so they have that denominator. Good luck.